Thank you for inviting me to speak in this session. It's very significant that we're 55 years into the work being done by the environmental design and engineering part of UCL. And in this presentation, I'd like to firstly reflect on this 55-year period, and then discuss how architects working with other designers and clients in the built environment need to commit, prepare, act, and share in order to address the issues that we're facing. So in 1965, Ralph Hopkinson was appointed as the first chair of the department, out of which the IEDE was established in 2014, of which I'm a visiting professor. And it's interesting to just think about what's happened in this period. 55 years ago, the Beatles released Help. But interestingly, I picked up a copy of an old architectural design magazine from a few years before then, and this had features on the construction of Corbusier's Unité d'Habitation in Berlin. It had really innovative examples of ferrocement concrete design. It had solar panels and solar shading devices, and adverts for laminated timber construction, and including the crystalline hall as a government pavilion in an exhibition in Brussels. What have we been doing for the last 55 years? Also an article in The Guardian which highlighted the issues around fossil fuel firms and their contribution to the problems of the climate emergency. It was in 1959 that a physicist first told the Petroleum Institute that a 10% increase in CO2 will be sufficient to melt the ice cap and submerge New York. I think this chemical contamination is more serious than most people tend to believe. Since then, there have been various alerts of the impacts on the climate. In 1992, the Rio Earth Summit got some world agreement to what we had to do. 1998, unfortunately, the US refused to ratify the Kyoto Agreement. And even last year, members of OPEC were claiming that climate campaigners are the biggest threat to the industry, and claims that they're misleading the public with unscientific warnings about global warming. Field & Clerk Bradley Studios have been working for 40 years in the area of low energy architecture. So in '78, the firm started looking at passive solar design and community energy projects, developing significant improvements in how to work with the design team to reduce operational energy. And then after 2000, working holistically in housing, school design and workplace design to reduce energy consumption, and now looking at embodied carbon and passive house standards of design. What has changed though in the 55 years is that the public now also realize there's a problem, not just individual scientists. And the UK Architects Declare, which has now got hundreds of signatures and also groups around the world, advocated 11 issues that architects should pursue in order to work towards this issue. Raising awareness, advocating faster change, establishing mitigation principles, sharing knowledge, evaluating all projects against issues, upgrading existing buildings, including life cycle costing, regenerative design, collaborating across the industry, accelerating to the shift to low embodied carbon materials, and minimizing wasteful use of resources. And so I want to just cover 4 issues that I think architects need to address. We need to commit, we need to prepare, we have to act, and then we have to share. Committing is the first thing. We need to recognize the issues and align our values and commit to act and understand and measure impacts. There's really useful work that's been done over for more than a decade now on global footprinting. The world can only currently has 1.7 global hectares per person on the planet. And different countries have different access to resources and also consume more than their country can supply. So in the UK, we have a global footprint of 4.2 when the world can only support 1.7. In the UK, we only have 1.1 of resource in our country when we need 1.7. And overall, we're in the red category of needing almost 3 planets of resources to support our lifestyle. And energy, transport, food, goods, services, and infrastructure all contribute to this impact. So firstly, last year, we all looked at our own individual carbon footprints. The World Wildlife Fund for Nature has a good tool. And across all our offices, we worked out what our impacts were. We were trying to target 10.5, and we ranged between 10.8 and 13.4. It's split in quadrants, really, between food, travel, our stuff, and our home. And we've also done this to look at the impact of our practice. And this last year, which is up to April this year, so this is before the pandemic, we are lower than we've ever been at 0.8 tons per person. Compared, you see, in 2006, when we were double that impact per person. So our office operations are getting better. We also looked at things like waste in our operations. We're not recycling what we should. And we looked at our food. We have a chef in each of our offices, and now we're going to vegetarian and vegan food, having significant benefits in our carbon impacts. We've done work, and this exhibition is still in our London office, looking at the carbon impacts, embodied carbon impacts of materials, each totem representing the carbon impact of the sample contained in each of these. This exhibition is now online, available through our website. So the understanding of embodied carbon is really developing. And I'll come on to this again with the tool that we've released. So we then, as we try and understand our impacts, we need to communicate this in our staff, we need to train, and we need to update our systems and our approach. So we've set out a 10-year plan, and most of this has to be done in the next 5 years if we're to try to get to net zero carbon in our projects by 2030. First of all, we're setting up methods to understand what the carbon impacts are. We're working on One Planet Living action plans for each of our projects. And we're collecting information on how well our projects perform in use so that that can influence our benchmarking. We're then targeting year-on-year improvements, working out that by 2022, we have to detail and specify for net zero operational carbon, so that by 2025, all projects starting on site should be capable of operating at net zero. There's lots of skills that have to develop in the industry to achieve this. And after handover, we need to make sure that we help clients actually achieve this in operation through in-use monitoring and post-occupancy evaluation. There are various tools and a lot of information now available on the web. There's a fantastic project called Project Drawdown, which I recommend you look at to try and see the scale of the benefits that could be possible if we fund them. And the UN Sustainable Development Goals and the 10 One Planet Living principles are really useful in helping frame the discussion with clients. Using the One Planet Living principles, we can help define at the early stages of a project which items we want to focus on and which might be achievable within the funding that is available. We set up understanding of our carbon impacts, both targets for operational carbon and targets for embodied carbon. And we use the information from the great guidance from LETI and soft landings protocols to guide how we act through the design stages and operation of our buildings. And Ashley will cover some of these in his talk, but post-occupancy understanding is important, and the IEDE has done a lot of work in this. But we've got to realize how little time there is before 2030. So if we're briefing a project now, it might open in 2024. If we do a POE, we'll need at least 2 years to get information before we start the briefing of another job that would open in 2030. We're running out of time. We have to act immediately. So we've got protocols set up for how we should achieve this and different levels of feedback, which we discuss with clients. We then have to act. We have to communicate and agree with clients how we can work, define responsibilities, align the project team, and construct and monitor the projects. First of all, we should always look at renovation before new build. For example, we've recently renovated the Hayward Gallery in central London and the Queen Elizabeth Hall. Alexandra Palace in London, another building that we've recently renovated. And in schools, looking at how existing buildings could be repurposed for schools, perhaps thinking about that before building new ones to reduce embodied carbon impacts. And then in post-occupancy evaluation, as we have at the Hive in Worcester Library, monitoring it continuously and actually proving that you can actually have operation in use, which is significantly better than design targets set. By all this data collection, we then hope to be able to share this information and use it to help in design of future buildings. One project we're working on at the moment for King's College in Cambridge is a brief that demanded low carbon emissions, passive house standards, and a scheme that could have a lifetime of 100 years. So we've looked firstly at the embodied carbon of the construction, and we're probably in the situation as the second of these graphs, where we start off with a carbon positive structure, but potentially over time, the operation will have carbon impacts. But the ideal that we're looking for, and which may be possible, is to have a negative operation embodied carbon throughout the lifetime of the building. So we're looking very closely at the airtightness, the specification of all the materials. And we're proving at the moment that for the first 10 years, we will be carbon negative. And through the later design stages and the use of more tools, including FCB carbon, we're looking to see if we can actually have a route to complete zero carbon in use of this building and operational and embodied. We then need to share information. We need to share knowledge, celebrate success, and lobby for change. And this is why engagement with UCL and the UCL's engagement with the industry is so important. Our own publications are things that we've used to try and share our design approach. The book called The Environmental Handbook, which is now out of print. There is a website called The Environmental Handbook, and we've just recently got funding for a knowledge transfer partnership with UCL to try and do an update of this information. And we're running 2 PhDs, one on international climate design and one on climate emergency and university buildings. Our involvement with the LETI design guide and the cross-industry collaboration is really important to set benchmarks and to lobby for change with government. Building less, building light, building wise, building low carbon, build for the future and build collaboratively being the underlying themes of the LETI guidance. And we're involved in various projects with UCL looking at the performance of buildings, working from Joe Jack Williams, who did his PhD at UCL, who's now a researcher with us. Supporting research into school design, as was mentioned at the outset. This is recent work on overheating and design characteristics of schools, showing that schools A, B, C, and D in here had cross-flow ventilation, good use of thermal mass, restricted room depths, and optimized room heights, which actually were the defining characteristics of buildings which would be resilient to climate change. So simple design solutions. The understanding of embodied carbon is now really increasing, and with the reductions in operational carbon impacts, embodied carbon is now becoming the big issue. So you can see here in the 2025 pie chart of the over a 60-year life of a building, it's the embodied carbon that's now going to be significant. And it's the substructure and superstructure which have the big impacts. We believe that it's the early stage design period that can allow the biggest impacts to be made. And we've recently reduced FCBS carbon, a tool which we've been developing over the last 18 months, to the industry. And we're developing this further in-house to help us look at early stage design to give clear indications of operational and embodied carbon impacts. And this is freely available. Within a half an hour or an hour of use, you can have quite useful interactive information on the impacts of design decisions. So where does that leave us? Well, for architects, the Code of Conduct, which was reissued last year, does have quite clear steers that architects should be following. Within the principles of competence, there are competence on the environment, and all RIBA members should promote sustainable design and development principles. We should provide services. We should inform clients of sustainable practices. We should develop and discuss written sustainability projects and make reasonable endeavors to specify and use sustainable materials. We should use reasonable endeavors to minimize whole life carbon and energy use. So these are requirements of our professional institution. Also, for community and society, there are requirements that we have due regard for the effect of our activities and completed projects, which on the effects that they may have on users, the local community and society. And in performing our services, we should promote stronger communities and improve equality, diversity and inclusion in the built environment. These shouldn't be taken lightly, and all architects now are responsible for acting. And I don't know that we do it well enough. Recently, for a Smart Practice conference, I was involved in this advice which is being published, which is a bit like those headings I've shown. So first, committing, aligning values, commit to action, understand the impact, measure impacts of our own performance, and measure the impacts of our projects. Put our own house in order, communicate well, train, update our systems, collaborate and educate, and that includes collaboration obviously with organizations like UCL, and close the loop, review and improve and monitor. So are we doing this, and how can we? Interestingly, when I searched for climate emergency and UCL, this was the first in the hits, which actually was an event held last month by the UCL Faculty of Arts and Humanities. The UCL community has enormous number of people working in this sector, but we've got to join up and we've got to work together and think holistically about the impacts. These films, which were shown on Thursday, the 22nd of October, Sub-Atlantic and Deep Weather, are really, really worth watching. The bottom right there is work in Bangladesh to try and retain land from being inundated by the sea. I mean, we're working in Bangladesh on projects ourselves. So 55 years ago, the Beatles released Help. We've got to help. And we've got to work together with UCL and the whole industry towards the ambitions of addressing the climate emergency. Thank you.